Chad Buchanan, Pacers GM, says it. Myles Turner will not be traded before opening night. What is the context of that? What does that mean for this Pacers team? And why did he say that? Plus, what would it take to reignite talks with the Lakers, change the values there? And Langston Galloway is going to be signing with the Pacers. We'll cover it all today on the Locked On Pacers podcast.
You are Locked On Pacers, your daily Indiana Pacers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome in to another edition of the Locked On Pacers podcast, where we, of course, talk about the Indiana Pacers, as always. My name's Tony East. I cover the team for Forbes and the Westside Community News, and today we've been thrown off the schedule, as will happen when practices and interviews and things start happening, because today was supposed to be bench forward player preview season day. Instead, Chad Buchanan says Myles Turner is going to be on the opening night roster. Shams Charania adds in some context. Pacers and Lakers talks trade this week. Not happening. Myles Turner's in Indy at the Pacers golf outing. Lots to cover there. What it could mean right now. What it would take for teams to potentially revisit talks. Lots of angles there. And then Scott Agnes, Fieldhouse Files, was at the golf event. And if you follow his Substack, Fieldhouse Files, you'll have seen the cover photo for the article from the event featured Langston Galloway putting. Langston Galloway's not on the Pacers yet. We'll talk about that all today on Locked On Pacers. We'll start by diving into the big news in Pacerland, though, of course. Straight up, thank you to Alex Golden from his show, The Blue and Golden, as well as Setting the Pace, for transcribing this straight onto Twitter for me so I can read it instead of having to have transcribed myself. Full quote from Pacers general manager Chad Buchanan on Myles Turner. Kevin Bowen of 1075, the fan asks, Myles Turner related, do you expect him to be here being Indiana, opening night? Chad Buchanan says, yes. Myles, obviously this offseason went through some things involving him, but Myles has been an absolute pro. He's in great shape, healthy, and ready to go. I have no idea on his shape status, but I did notice in the picture that the Pacers posted of him on their social media account, he looked skinnier than he has in the past. It's usually the opposite of the offseason when people are looking for more muscle, things like that. He looks thinner, which I thought was interesting. Yes, he's had a lot going on involving him this summer between the Pacers pursuing DeAndre Ayton to sign above him. Obviously, all these Lakers talks. He's in trade rumors for years and years. But Chad Buchanan says here to the question, do you expect him to be here on opening night? Yes. Now, I think this close to camp, especially with all the Lakers reporting from people like Ramona Shelburne, Dave McMenamin, Buchanan, The Athletic, all about, they would explore rush trades, but they're running out of options, and they view their backcourt rotation with Russ starting. All this stuff now coming out the way it has made me think, okay, the Lakers aren't going to trade Russell Westbrook. But that was the only thing that made sense to me from a Myles trade perspective this close to the season, because most teams have their rotation or their center locked up. They feel good about that. That was the only one that I thought made sense at this time. Most teams already have their center. So if the Lakers are truly out, which it sounds like at this stage they would be, if Chad Buchanan has that sort of confidence, then it makes sense that the Pacers would be confident enough to say, yes, he'll be our starting center on opening night. Trade's not there yet, no point. And a lot could change during the season. Another team's center gets hurt, right? The Pacers have to trade him by the deadline if they have a feeling they're going to lose him for nothing. Maybe he extends. A lot could change the dynamics here to make Turner still tradable mid-season. It's not like it's an error to not trade him at this point, especially with his value potentially at an nadir after his injury last year. But it is noteworthy they will be carrying him into the season, even though that felt like the most likely option given how the last couple weeks had gone for the Pacers and for other teams in talks. So Myles Turner will start the season for the Pacers on opening night as their center. Again, not surprising, but now confirmed, which is fascinating, that the Lakers talks and the Lakers trade did not happen. Buddy Hield being involved in that as well. And that's not it. That's not the end of the Lakers Pacers chatter, the Myles Turner chatter, because if it was just that, I might have stuck with the old show format and done the bench forwards, because I get that it's news that when your GM confirms something that substantial, but that was it. Myles Turner was already on the Pacers. It's not like them saying, yeah, he'll be still on the team in 10 days when our preseason starts or whatever, is like some bombshell thing. But then Shams Charania comes in. He's on Bally Sports The Rally and decides to change everything and add a lot of context Shams Charania on the rally says, quote, I'm told the Lakers and Pacers did engage in some trade conversations this week. So first of all, let's stop there. The Lakers just signed Dennis Schroeder after he was playing very well in Eurobasket. They traded for Patrick Beverley. A lot of signs said, okay, hey, maybe they're still interested in getting a Russell Westbrook trade done. They got these other point guards now that could play behind Russ. And after Schroeder, that would have been about a week ago. It would have made sense for them to circle around and say, all right, we got other point guards in the mix. Let's go back to the Pacers and see what we can do. So this timing all makes sense. The Dennis Schroeder signing, in theory, makes it possible for the Lakers to say, all right, one more time before camp, Pacers, what are you thinking? Turner just arrived back in Indy a few days ago. Like, it would have been, in theory, the perfect time for one last go at it from both franchises. So that makes sense to me that part happens. But Shams continues and says, the Pacers' demand for 2 unprotected first-round picks is just not appealing for the Lakers. That is what I've been talking about in this saga the whole time. The Pacers, unprotected is the big word there. They should be chasing unprotected picks. That is just what got the Hawks DeJounte Murray. That is just what got the Cavs Donovan Mitchell. That is just what got the Timberwolves Rudy Gobert. The fact that they were willing to commit unprotected assets. I don't know what the market was for those guys in total myself, but there were murmurs about tons of other teams being in on those guys at various times. The team that won them was willing to give up unprotected assets to get them, right? Unprotected picks have a ton of value, and the Pacers should be chasing from a Lakers franchise that has a lot of volatility, given that they can attract big free agents at any time, but also sometimes make silly mistakes under their current regime. Those picks could be very valuable in a long time. And one first-round pick is, quite frankly, just not enough. Even one unprotected first, I would think about it myself. If the trade was Westbrook for Buddy Hield and Myles Turner, I still don't think that's quite enough. It takes one first-round pick, to me, for a team to get off of a salary like Russell Westbrook's $47 million deal, and another one to acquire Turner and Hield together. Turner alone is probably worth the first. Hield's just a neutral value player on his current deal. Either way, all these layers get peeled back, and it seems like, protections or not, at least you have to start at 2 first-round picks and then negotiate from there. If the Lakers aren't willing to do that, then it made all the sense in the world that all these talks would die. And the Pacers are smart to say, no, we want 2 unprotected first-rounders. Those are worth a lot, so I get why the Lakers would say no. They just saw how valuable those were for the guys I mentioned earlier. But the Pacers are right to say, hey, we're headed into a rebuild. We want all the strong assets we can get. We would like unprotected first-round picks from you to do this. And the Lakers, who that's pretty much all they can trade, are smart to say no. So I think that was the impetus for the confidence from Chad Buchanan. The fact that these talks happened within a week and the Lakers said, no, we're not going to do 2 first. Well, the Pacers can say, okay, we still have Myles Turner. Like, the way leverage is always viewed in these has always been messed up to me. And this will sound Pacers-colored glasses-y because it makes the Pacers look better. But I talked about this on Lockdown NBA with the Cavs. They got Donovan Mitchell. And I think the Knicks thought, in their pursuit of Donovan Mitchell, that they had the leverage because Donovan Mitchell's from Brooklyn and they had a ton of assets and they were the most natural trade partners. So they thought, okay, we're probably going to get him. We have the leverage because they don't have a better offer somewhere else, and this just makes the most sense. But the team that has the most leverage in trade talks is always the team trading away the good player. They have the player under contract on their team. They already have the thing. The Nets had the leverage in Kevin Durant talks. The Jazz had the leverage in Donovan Mitchell talks. And yes, Russell Westbrook is a huge name, but let's be honest, the Lakers are trying to get rid of him. The leverage is on the Pacers side and that they have Myles Turner. They could trade him somewhere else if he plays well. They have Buddy Hield, who the Lakers have past interest in. Yeah, it's not perfect, obviously. There's a lot of flaws in the logic there because these aren't superstars in the way that some of the guys I mentioned earlier are. But the Pacers have the leverage in that way. And that's why I think they are right to say if we're not having our asking price being met, it's more likely that things would change in our favor than against their favor. So that is what was said that changed everything today and on the news front for Myles Turner. I assumed at this stage it would be this way, but now we can confirm when preseason opens up, barring no injuries in camp or anything like that, Myles Turner, Jalen Smith, the starting front court for the Indiana Pacers. Going to be absolutely fascinating to see those two together, what it looks like. And I was thinking about this today. I said this on Myles Turner's season preview podcast earlier this week. There's a chance that not only Turner has a chance to prove himself this season, but there's a chance the starting 5 is Tyrese Haliburton, Buddy Hield, Benedict Mather, and Jalen Smith, Myles Turner, right? That would make a lot of sense. That would also be 4 players who have never played a minute with Myles Turner, who's entering his 8th season with the Pacers. Absolutely crazy to see what's going on with the Pacers roster, but there's the confirmation from Chad Buchanan. But I don't want to say the saga is dead just yet. You'll have to hear the Lakers and Russell Westbrook more and more often, but not as much. Not as much. But I want to talk about this because I think this is relevant to this discussion. What would have to change from a Pacers perspective or Lakers perspective for these talks to reignite, for the Pacers to potentially still end up doing this trade? Because yes, it sounds like Turner's going to be on the Pacers opening night, but as has been the case for all of time, sometimes these first level feelers from teams can be the impetus or something else. Remember, the Pacers had interest in Ayton at the trade deadline last year, and then they went after him in free agency. I don't know that this means the Pacers and Lakers talks are dead just for now. What would it take for things to change? Let's talk about that. Hey guys, I want to take one short little break here to talk to you about BetOnline.net, your number one source for football betting info this season. You can find all the latest player developments, team matchups, news, podcasts, in-depth articles, and analysis on every game you can find over at betonline.net. And as always, BetOnline remains your continued source for all your sports wagering info with live betting and up-to-the-minute scores for every sport out there. They got lines up for football already for the coming weeks of movement on the Colts-Chiefs line. Chiefs now favored by 5.5 as opposed to 6.5 earlier in the week. They got those lines again over at betonline.net. Colts 0-1-1, big game for them. It's the fastest and easiest way to check in on all your favorite games and events, including MLB, MMA, boxing, and golf. Head over to betonline.net or use your mobile device to learn more because BetOnline is where the game starts. Thank you, as always, for making Locked On Pacers your first listen today and every single day. Hey, Locked On Lakers is your second listen. I've plugged them all the time, but they've been involved in so many shows here for Locked On Pacers. So why not go check out Locked On Lakers with the Kamenetsky brothers? Fantastic stuff. So this is the last segment I have to do on this now until these talks reignite because Turner, the Pacers starting center on opening night, now confirmed by Chad Buchanan. But what would it take for these talks to reignite? What would it take for the Lakers to come back to the Pacers and say, hey, we're more willing to do this? Or the flip side, the Pacers to go back to the Lakers and say, hey, we're more willing to do this. Because, look, Russell Westbrook, yeah, his contract is bad. It's also expiring. It is also expiring. First-round picks are valuable for a rebuilding team, and the Pacers are certainly that. Myles Turner's contract is expiring. There will be a point where leverage runs out for the Pacers. Like, there are a lot of layers that suggest the Lakers have a lot of pressure this season. LeBron James is on the roster that, you know, the motivation still makes sense, too, that this could just not be dead totally. Right now, for sure. For sure. Pacers are right to ask for the moon. Remember, Michael Scott of HoopsHype reported one of their initial asks of the Lakers was 2 first-round picks and Talen Horton-Tucker, and the Lakers take on Daniel Tice. The Pacers clearly value Hield and Turner quite a bit in these talks. Either way, all this to say, I don't think this is totally dead just yet, just because Turner is going to enter the season with the Pacers as their starting center. What would it take to change things? Well, the Lakers, I think, have more ways things could change. And that might just be my outsider's perspective. If someone who covers the Lakers may feel differently, but looking at the Lakers, they're clearly betting Darvin Ham and more health. Darvin Ham, their new head coach, and more health for LeBron, and more health for Anthony Davis, and all their summer additions: Lonnie Walker, Troy Brown, Thomas Bryant, Damian Jones, Dennis Schroeder, Patrick Beverley. All this stuff together with what they had last year can be good enough to get the Lakers back to being good, right? They won a championship 2 years ago. We're not that far away from that. They were awful last year, right? The Westbrook Lakers were awful. They won 33 games. They won 7. I can't do math. They won 8 more games. No, 7. I was right the first time. They won 7 more games than the Pacers, right? The Pacers were awful last year. The Lakers only won 7 more games. That was a LeBron James team. They clearly have pressure to be good now. LeBron is old and aging. Anthony Davis, injury prone. Contract kind of, sort of. Not a lot of years left on it. Sure, Russ expires next year. But then LeBron's a year older. You have less stuff. You went through a whole season with a lot of your stuff, right? The Lakers don't have a long runway. And I say that all to say, if they start this season 5-8, 5-9, you know, not even horrible. The Pacers were about that last year and then ended up clawing back to almost 500. But let's say they start about that. That could be something to me that reignites this. Let's say the Lakers start 5-12, really bad. Like, they get through a quarter of the season, and there's a lot of studies every year on the standings that say, you know, through about 20 games, of the season, roughly of the 16 playoff teams, 14 of them are already, in the top 8 in the conferences, right? You can get a decent feel for the standings pretty early in the season. Say the Lakers start the season poorly, right? 6-14, 7-13, something like that, and they're on the outside looking in, right? That could very quickly ignite talks, and all this trade chatter gets drummed up around December 15th when guys who signed as free agents can now be traded. It's not impossible to me that would be the biggest thing that could change things. It's a very poor start for the Lakers, and I don't even want to just limit it to the Lakers. Let's say early in the Lakers season they're 5-8, not even horrible, but when they have Westbrook in, they don't look so good. But when Schroeder's in or Beverly's in, they look great, or they look capable, or their defense is strong, or they're scoring a lot, whatever. A lot of ways you can imagine what I just said. Let's say that's the case, and they go, okay, he doesn't fit. There's been talks of that the talk is that they won't do this, but the fact that it gets brought up is noteworthy, right? The Rockets just sent home John Wall last year. They said, nope, we have no reason for you to play in games for us. We have a lot of young guards who want to play instead. Like, if the Lakers get to that situation, that could also reignite things. All this to say, if the Lakers have any sort of poor start with Russ specifically or as a team, that is a way they could turn back to this and go, okay, we're more willing to give up these picks. Our season is going poorly. What we're trying isn't working. We need more talent. That is the one way it could shift in a significant way in the Pacers' favor. A less significant way it could shift is an injury to a center for the Lakers, right? Damian Jones, Thomas Bryant. I know I'm missing one who they signed this summer. But something like that, where they go, oh, crap, we need a big. Hey, look, Myles Turner, we went after him earlier. That is another way that they could turn back around and go, okay, we need to make this happen. Let's ease up some protections, or let's include this, or take this, whatever. And maybe they'd be more willing to take Tyson in that situation. All that to say, there are a lot of ways that things could change on the Lakers side that make them slightly more interested in doing a deal like this. And that could potentially reignite this midseason. So keep an eye on the Lakers in the standings. Keep an eye on Russell Westbrook's on off, things like that, because this can always change very quickly. James Harden got traded 12 games into the season for the Rockets when he got dealt. That does happen sometimes when seasons start off poorly. The Pacers were involved in that trade. Pacers fans remember that very well, right? That kind of stuff is always possible. A Kevin Durant trade too could in theory change things if Kyrie Irving becomes a potential option, right? A lot just could change in that way. Now, it's not just limited to changes for the Lakers, right? Let's say the Pacers start off and Myles gets hurt. Well, then they might circle back on this, and maybe Turner will return during the ongoing season. But as an expiring, the only teams that'd be willing to acquire him would either want to know he would extend or have a very good chance of re-signing him. And the Lakers could feel confident in that, given that they, value cap space next summer and they're a glamour market. In that way, they could get more leverage, feeling like we're one of the few teams that are willing to trade for Turner because he got hurt. That is one thing that could hurt the Pacers, but still make talks reappear, is Myles Turner getting hurt or a poor start from him. In general, Myles, this is not a turning point necessarily for him. It's kind of known what he is, even at his worst. But if he's having a down year in a new role, and obviously the Pacers are worse, but that could damage his value when the Pacers go, okay, we're willing to do whatever you think is closer to value. So Turner is, as well could dictate this being reignited, depending on how his season starts in the context of this deal as well. So those are the two biggest ones. I don't think Buddy Hield, if he gets completely injured and he's off the table, that could make talks impossible. It's very hard for me to imagine that he significantly changes things unless he's really good, which could help the Pacers. But it's hard for me to imagine that the trade urgency changes based on his play or lack thereof. He's had such an up and down career that it feels like his value is kind of known. He's not on an expiring deal, things like that. But it's possible if he starts the season off incredibly well, for example, that reignites things like that. Now, for like I talked about with the Lakers, if they start off the season poorly, they could have more motivation to get this trade done, to trade their assets for good players and try to salvage what little time they might have left with LeBron James and Anthony Davis at their best. On the flip side, the Pacers don't have that same problem, in air quotes, don't have that same thing affecting them where their record matters for their urgency. They're not supposed to be good. And if they are good, they'd be less likely, honestly, to make a trade. So it's nothing about the Pacers' record or their win-loss would, to me at least, make them want to go back, and unless they're like 0-20 or something completely ridiculous where they're out of it so fast that they decide to trade stuff, and they will be out of it at some point. But either way, I don't think their record could dictate them having more urgency, but I do think the way they play or the way Turner plays could change things. But the Lakers' record could certainly matter. The last thing I think that is a little potentially relevant to the Pacers maybe wanting to have some more urgency to do this deal is like, let's say the season starts and Isaiah Jackson is just unbelievable. Like they have to play him 30 minutes a game. They can't get him off the floor. They told Jalen Smith he would start. Like that could motivate them to say, okay, we don't even want Turner in the rotation next year. Let's just trade him now. And that would hurt their leverage a little bit, but that could reignite talks to me, which is the point here. So all this to say, these many things of improving young players, injuries to anybody involved, a poor Lakers start, a poor Russ start, all this at play. I wouldn't say that the Lakers stuff is dead, but I would say that right now it's no longer worth discussing until one of those things potentially happens. So Myles Turner, opening night starter for the Pacers, and we'll see if anything happens mid-season because he is on an expiring deal. But it was cool to see that he was at the golf outing back in town, and we will see what his impact can be for the Pacers. If you're curious to learn more about Turner's upcoming season with the Pacers, expectations, stats, questions, all that sort of stuff, 2 episodes ago here on Locked On Pacers, we talked about all that stuff for his upcoming season. Hey, that wasn't the only Pacers roster news from Wednesday. What a busy day in Pacerland. Langston Galloway's name was floated around already, but it's now even more in the mix. I'll tell you why, and if he has a chance to make the Pacers roster here in a second. Thank you, as always, for making Locked On Pacers your first listen today and every single day for your second listen, Locked On Suns, because Robert Sarver selling the Suns. Wow, that story keeps getting more dynamic. And potentially Locked On Celtics, because just got a notification that Ime Udoka might be significantly suspended. Very cryptic from Woj. Still no details on that. Obviously, Locked On's got you covered for all the news around the league. And speaking of, the Pacers had some news. Now let's go back in time to last week when Evan Sidery of Basketball News reports that the Pacers are reportedly going to sign James Johnson and Langston Galloway. And then they signed James Johnson, but not Langston Galloway. Peculiar. So clearly, the source or sources who he confirmed this with knew something because James Johnson did sign. He also leaked the Kendall Brown signing a couple hours early, right? Like he knew something. He was talking to the right people. But Langston Galloway has not signed with the Pacers. So what's up with that? Well, let's talk clarity. Let's talk about what this means and things like that. So present day, or yesterday, I guess, more accurately, Scott Agnes of Fieldhouse Files is at the Pacers golf outing event for the Pacers Foundation charity event. Super awesome. He posts an article. The headline of this article is, "Down a New Path, Pacers are positioning themselves for the long term." Very good stuff. Talks a lot about what Chad Buchanan had to say. And my eyes perked up because the photo Scott used at the top of this article has Jalen Smith and assistant coach Mike Weinar and a couple other Pacers staffers watching another player putt. And that player putting is Langston Galloway at the Pacers outing. He's not signed to the Pacers. Imagine my surprise to see him in the photo. So later in the piece, Scott reports the young Pacers will need guidance and direction themselves. So the front office is considering forward James Johnson and guard Langston Galloway for a non-guaranteed roster spot. Both were at the golf outing, and being older guys, both were playing in it as well. So Langston Galloway not signed to the Pacers, but at the Pacers golf outing. I mean, look, they're going to sign him. Scott tweeted it later in the day. Guard Langston Galloway being considered for a veteran non-guaranteed role. So like I reported yesterday on the show and have tweeted out, James Johnson's deal is a 1-year non-guaranteed contract. So Langston Galloway presumably would get something similar. So let's back up. Because, Langston Galloway could be competing for a spot. There are no spots available right now. The Pacers roster is full. And that's why I talked about yesterday on the moves the Pacers could still make segment to open the show, this little dance they're going to do at the back of their roster, right? All these Exhibit 10 guys, Gabe York, David Servidis, David Stockton, Benny Boatwright, they could be waived at any moment. And then they go to the G League and they get a bonus, but they're not likely to stick with the Pacers. So it wouldn't surprise me, especially if Langston Galloway is already around, if the Pacers waive one of those guys. My prediction would be Benny Boatwright, but it could be any number of them. Langston Galloway is a guard, so maybe it's Stockton, New York. Anyway, doesn't matter who it is. They could waive one of those guys before Monday's camp. That player would still get their bonus but for reporting to the G League, and then they could sign Galloway. That's how they could do this in a way that all the reporting makes sense and everybody still gets what they were signed to get. So, anyway, now that you know the details of that, Langston Galloway going to apparently sign with the Pacers at some point this summer, and reading the tea leaves a tiny bit, if he's competing for a roster spot, he would likely be signed before camp to have the time to compete. It wouldn't be fair if James Johnson had all of training camp and preseason to prove himself, and Langston Galloway did not have similar time to do so. So I would imagine you will see that become official in the coming days. At some point, someone will be waived. Langston Galloway will be signed. I mean, if he's at the event, that all but confirms it to me. Anyway, I like the idea the Pacers have to sign a vet, and something I talked about with the James Johnson signing is, conference finalist. It's made the playoffs with several franchises, has the vet experience, has played on good teams with several stars. Like, that's kind of what the perfect vet to me for the Pacers is. And so we look at Langston Galloway, less of a vet, 5 years younger than James Johnson. Would still be the oldest Pacer, born in 1991, would just be slightly older than TJ McConnell and Daniel Tice. But, his experience is a little different. He doesn't have quite as many franchises. He's only been in the playoffs 2 different seasons, but one of those teams he made the playoffs with was the Suns 2 years ago. So he has been in the finals before, which is very helpful. Has experience with Team USA just this summer, right? He's got pretty good experience, and that is what is important in the vet, is that they've been around and they've got good deep playoff experience to teach guys. So Langston Galloway, background for those of you unaware, 8-year vet, been around for a while. Like I said, it was on that Suns team. Played for the Pistons for a while when they were, being good in the Blake Griffin era. Spent some time with the Knicks early in his career. Pretty good shooter, 37% from deep on 4 attempts per game in his career. Roughly a league average efficiency guy, but just like is okay at a lot of stuff, but not great at anything kind of guard, right? A kind of valuable player to have on your bench if you're looking for guard depth. So Langston Galloway, an all right player. And funnily enough, last year, the only 2 deals he signed I believe, I could be wrong about them being hardships, but he signed 2 10-day deals, one with the Nets and one with the Bucks. So for 10 days last year, him and James Johnson were actually teammates with Brooklyn, funnily enough. But Langston Galloway, yes, will be in the mix competing for the Pacers' last roster spot. So just fully zoomed out, the Pacers need forwards more than guards, right? They don't have a ton of actual, this guy should play forward as his natural position forwards. The list is basically just O'Shea Brissett, Terry Taylor maybe. I think he's more of a 5. They're going to start a center at the 4, right? That's where James Johnson's value is to me. He's a forward, whereas Langston Galloway is a guard. And so that tiebreaker alone makes me lean James Johnson if the Pacers are going to pick one. But I will say this. The Pacers learned the hard way last year how tough it can be to go without quality point guard play, right? They had Brogdon, they tried LeVert, they had a backup of McConnell. All 3 of those guys got hurt or were in health and safety protocols or were traded away. So they tried Brad Wanamaker, who they signed in camp, and that went horribly. And so then they brought in Kiefer Sykes, who had a really good 10-day stretch, and then he also fell off and it wasn't working out. Like Dwayne Washington was playing backup 1 at times last year. All this to say, the value the Pacers were getting at that position was pretty low at times last season. Lance Stevenson was at times their best option. And Lance played well last year. But even Lance at his best is still not exactly what you'd want at that spot. So all this to say, the Pacers learned last year how important depth can be at that position. Let's pretend TJ McConnell gets hurt again. Their current point guard rotation would be Halliburton and Andrew Nembhard. And that's it. And Nembhard's a rookie. And that will struggle. And so, look, I understand that these 2 guys, if it's between Nembhard and Galloway for minutes, you pick Nembhard 100 out of 100 times. But you have to remember, for a young and developing team, having a setup man who can get guys the ball in the right spots at the right time, things like that, is important to help other guys be in positions to succeed and grow on the NBA level. So it is still important to have veteran point guards. The Pacers found that out last year when they were trying to win and when they were trying to develop talent. And so I get that the Pacers already have a ton of guards, right? The 3 we already mentioned, Halliburton, McConnell, and Nembhard. They have Mathurin in the mix, Buddy Hield in the mix, Nesmith in the mix, Duarte in the mix, right? They have a lot of guards, but only 3 point guards, Halliburton, McConnell, and Nembhard. And so Langston Galloway, I would consider him point guard or at least point guard adjacent. He would definitely be at that spot if the Pacers signed him. And so I get positionally where he provides value. I still think James Johnson provides more value, but just talking about Langston Galloway's fit, I think depth at the point guard is good. But I think depth at forward is more needed for the Pacers. So Langston Galloway, at some point, expect to get a notification that He's been signed by the Pacers, and competition is good, right? If one guy gets hurt, it's clear who you get. Having a vet is good. Having a vet at a key position is good. Like either one of those guys, James Johnson or Langston Galloway, making the roster, I think would be a fine thing for the Pacers. And I think competition to see who fits the best or who makes the most sense in your culture is also great. So I think James Johnson has a lot of advantages. Played with Carlisle, plays a more in-depth position, right? Or more in-demand position, excuse me. He was in a rotation for a team that made the playoffs last season. Langston Galloway only played in 7 games last season. A lot of the zoomed out stuff says James Johnson has the upper hand here, but I would understand both. I personally think James Johnson should get the spot. I am not in charge of anything, nor do I have any say, nor do I think my opinion matters. But I would go with James Johnson if I did have a say in the matter. We will see what happens, though, so expect to see Langston Galloway's name across your screen if you get news on your phone. We'll talk about it here when it happens, if it merits more talk than I've already given it. And yeah, that's the Pacers news of the day. Lots of roster stuff, new players in the mix. And we'll continue to cover all that here on the Locked On Pacers podcast. Tomorrow, now that it's Thursday, I guess I can just have it out there for you guys. Pacers have a front office event. Media have been invited. So we'll be hearing from some front office people. Obviously, we heard from a lot on the radio today, but more questions. I plan on asking a lot about the Ayton stuff, Malcolm Brogdon, Myles Turner, all these things that happened this summer that we don't have a ton of clarity on. So, of course, we'll cover all that tomorrow on Locked On Pacers, as well as any other news that comes out in said presser. And then next week, we'll get the 2 episodes in for the final season previews we haven't done because this week has just been totally thrown off by signings and news and things like that, as well as media day. Practices will start. There's a lot coming, and we'll have it all covered for you here on the Locked On Pacers podcast. So thank you guys a ton for listening. Hope you have a great day, and we will see you tomorrow.